Hello and welcome to the Rogers Brief. I'm Adam Rogers. Thank you for watching and thank you for listening. As you can see, I've got a little bit of a different look here today. I'm coming to you from St. John's, Newfoundland, where I'm over competing at the National Championships for fast pitch in the Masters division, which is for over 40 participants. The Open division is going on here as well. Some great games. I'm playing with, of course, Team Nova Scotia. We're 2-0 so far. We won our first game 1-0, and the second game 10-1, both over Ontario teams. So we'll see. We continue into the weekend. So coming to you from over here, and the games are going on during the day, so I haven't had a chance to watch every moment of the Mass Casualty Commission proceedings. I did watch some of yesterday's proceedings and a little bit of today's. I'm coming to you now. This is September 1st, so it's day 64. But I'm going to be talking to you now about day 63, which was yesterday. And that was where there were some presentations and discussions of gender-based groups making recommendations to the commission. So like I said, I've watched some of the proceedings, reviewed some of the coverage of it. One of the first things I'd say, I guess, is there hasn't been a lot of coverage, media coverage of it. From what I heard from people there wasn't a lot of people in person watching the proceedings. And this in itself is an issue, I think, for the people making recommendations. And so what happened? So what they had was a professor, Katrina Scott from the University of Western Ontario, making presentations. Others were reacting to that, and then discussions ensued throughout the day. One of the problems with nobody watching the proceedings, or very few people watching, and the media coverage being scant as it has been, is that if people aren't paying attention, then the political energy to, combat the issues, to make changes, to make recommendations, doesn't manifest itself. And these things, they're very difficult. So what the commission is going to do is make recommendations, but then there needs to be the political will after the fact to enact those recommendations. And although I think broadly speaking that there have been many positive changes in, gender-based violence issues, awareness, and sort of, people understanding how best to deal with these situations, I wouldn't say, and I don't think, just as a prediction, that the Mass Casualty Commission, either the events of the Mass Casualty or the Mass Casualty Commission itself, despite all of the attention that's been paid to this issue, is going to be the genesis of any major change in this area. It's unfortunately my prediction. I do think that changes are happening. I think generally, as the generations turn over, that younger generations are much better at this, at recognizing these things, reacting to them appropriately. But I don't think the mass casualty itself is going to be, the impetus for any major changes. One of the reasons that the Mass Casualty Commission isn't going to be is that it hasn't been, in my mind at least, directly or convincingly argued that this series of killings by Gabriel Wortman can be best explained through the lens of domestic violence. Not clear that it was the motivating factor behind what he did, and it's not clear whether it is a dominant explanatory factor either when you think of why he killed all these people, why the rampage started. We've seen this psychological assessment explanation from, that the RCMP created for themselves, a psychological autopsy they called it. It was highly criticized by the experts that the Mass Casualty Commission retained to review it. And it's not clear that even at the beginning of the rampage, whether Wortman was motivated primarily, exclusively, even as a majority of his motivations through a domestic violence lens. So we'll wait to see what the commission says about all of this material. But I have some questions as to how compelling that explanation has been. The RCMP psychological autopsy said that this was Gabriel Wortman trying to enact the ultimate humiliation against his spouse, whereas it seems more likely that his motivation was to humiliate the RCMP. If if you read Paul Palango's article in Frank magazine last week, where he's talking about criminal organizations, this Operation Hogwarts that was just wrapped up about 9 days, I think, before April 19th, April 18th, 2020, and the possible connections that Wortman may have had to that operation, the danger of confidential informants. Like, that is the angle I think people want to hear explored more. But the RCMP has focused on this domestic violence element, and the Mass Casualty Commission has picked up on that in full force. So that's been, that was, I think, part of the explanation as to why so few people seemed to be interested in what was happening yesterday at the Mass Casualty Commission. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with their report. The other part that came out, the other thing that came out this week was somewhat related to that, and this is the case of Susie Butlin, as she's been referred to in some of the articles, where some of the officers who were involved in the reaction to the mass casualty events, Stuart Basselt, Constable Greg Wiley, and Corporal Rodney McDonald, were also involved in this other case with Miss Butlin, who was unfortunately killed by her neighbor. His last name is Duggan. And, you know, that it was a very sad case, and it's being analyzed now in the context of these domestic violence reactions, official reactions from the police, from neighbors, how all that works, and, you know, asking the question as to why these aren't taken more seriously in an official capacity by the RCMP or other people in the community. Now, one person that did take it seriously was Judge Alain Bégin, the Truro Provincial Court judge. Because, all right, so if people not familiar, haven't read the articles, what happened, there was a report from Miss Butlin of a sexual assault from her neighbor, Mr. Duggan, and he denied the report. The RCMP decided not to lay charges at that time because there was they felt it was a consensual encounter. Even though Mr. Duggan was married and it was inappropriate for other reasons, it wasn't, they felt, a criminal act. So they didn't lay charges. But what they did, and they do this all the time, the RCMP, when they decide not to lay charges, they don't want to just leave. They don't want to give people bad news and then just leave. I mean, it's bad news to say, hey, we're not going to lay charges, but they don't want to just leave it hanging there with nothing. So they always say to people, well, we're not going to lay charges, but you can go and have apply for a peace bond against this person if you think they're threatening you and such. It kind of takes the RCMP off the hook a little bit in that direct encounter with the person who's saying, hey, you know, this happened to me, lay charges, go investigate. And then it's like, well, we don't think there's evidence there, but you can go do something, and here's something that you can get. And so I think in the RCMP's mind, they're giving the person something and some control of the situation. But really, it's very much a secondary process compared to the traditional criminal process. So Miss Butlin did apply for a peace bond, and when she did so, of course, you have to serve the defendant. Mr. Duggan became very upset with this. His wife became involved, and you know there was lots of threatening messages and harassment thereafter. And then that became a further part of the peace bond situation. Judge Bégin gets this application, looks it over, sees it's very serious, recommends to the Crown, why don't you take another look at this, consider this in the traditional criminal context. Because, again, if it's a peace bond situation, you're in there by yourself and you might cross-examine this person, or you're unlikely to hire a lawyer to do it for you because it's expensive. Whereas it's the criminal process, the traditional one, it's the Crown prosecutor that's handling those. The police are involved. They're there as witnesses. You know, it all gets handled in a much more professional manner than you trying to do it on your own, trying to understand the weird court processes and all those things. So the peace bond was adjourned. It was set for a date in September. It was adjourned until October. For some reason, it wasn't clear from the articles. And then Miss Butlin was unfortunately killed 4 days later by Mr. Duggan. And, you know, he sat drinking a pint of rum waiting for the police to show up. So sad situation. Unclear to me, just from what I've read, that the RCMP did something terribly improper. It's not obvious to me from what I've read that they should have laid charges in the initial complaint. But much of it has been redacted, and so it's not clear. We don't have all the details, so it's a difficult difficult assessment to make without having all of that information, and particularly the original complaint of Miss Butland. So anyway, all of that is in the news. Very difficult issues. I think over time, like I say, things are getting better, but I don't think that the Mass Casualty Commission, despite its own desire to be seen as a champion of victims in this regard on gender-based violence and domestic violence, I don't think people are convinced that that was the reason why Wortman went on his rampage, and so the rest of it, they're just not paying attention as much. Perhaps unfortunate, but change will be coming in that area, but I think from other sources. So those are some of the thoughts I had just watching some of day 63, yesterday's proceedings. I'm going to watch the stuff that was going on today, which was the RCMP, or the police organizations and their recommendations. Can imagine how self-serving those are going to be when I watch them, but I'll watch them anyway and see what emerges from that. And I'll bring you a further report from lovely St. John's, where the weather is unseasonably warm. I was here when I was 16 playing ball, and I remember all of their parents and fans were wearing thick jackets and bundled up. We were wearing t-shirts and shorts today, so a lovely spot to be. And like I said, I'll bring you another report probably tomorrow when I get a chance to watch more of the proceedings today and catch some of the media reaction to that as well, and bring you all of the news mass casualty related. All right, so thanks for watching. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.